All right, cool, Jen.
Hi.
We're here.
We're here.
Yeah.
It's today.
Did I do a good job on your intro?
You did a fantastic job on my intro.
What did I leave out?
I don't think you left anything out. I'm leaving tonight. Like I'm leaving tonight, right? Like I keep hearing it. I don't know if I'm living the fact that I'm leaving tonight.
What did you have to do to prepare mentally for? What I mean, this is the last one.
Yeah.
What did you have to do to prepare? Was it a similar mental preparation, or was it like, is it harder because you know it's the last one?
Oh, it's so much harder.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so much harder on so many levels. One, I failed Mount Logan last year. Okay, so when I went last year, I didn't know what I was getting into. So whatever I walked into, it was like, this is what it is, and we're just going to make the best of today and keep plugging forward. 2 days away from the summit, we got a call from the ranger that said he was picking us up. We're like, no, we're 2 days from the summit. I have been suffering nonstop. What do you mean you're picking us up? And they said the weather coming in was too dangerous. They wouldn't be able to get us. We wouldn't be able to melt snow to turn it into water, so we would die. So they're picking us up. I'm like, well, okay, maybe you can pick us up that way. So we literally had to ski all of our stuff down. So this mountain you ski. And then we had to bury it with flags because they're like, we're getting you off the mountain. We'll see when we can come back for weight and get your gear off the mountain. So we got off the mountain, and then they went back and got gear a couple days later, got all of our stuff, and then flew home. So I am going tonight back to Mount Logan, which will be my last climb of my 7-second summit quest, which would be the first female to climb the second highest peak on each continent, which is harder than the first 7. And this mountain is probably the hardest one. We've all heard of K2. K2 is a walk in a park compared to Mount Logan. When we get dropped off on the glacier, we have no trail, we have no path, we have nothing. And so we have to take a ski pole and go to the left of us, to the center of us, and to the right of us. And if you don't push through, that means it's strong enough to take one step. And then we do left, center, right, one more step, left, center, right, and we're roped off to each other so that if somebody falls into a crevasse, hopefully the weight of the other 2 of us will be able to keep all of us from falling into the crevasse. And I think it's about a 15-mile trek. So to make that happen. So it's going to take us a couple weeks. And
a couple weeks for 15 miles?
A couple weeks for 15 miles.
Like I do 15 miles a couple weeks because I'm fat.
Yeah, no.
Right?
I can do like 15 miles in a day, right? Like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a problem. We have to acclimatize because of altitude. And then also because of the location, it actually presents higher because of barometric pressure and blah, 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 blah. And then it is so windy that we have to build an igloo to put our tent in so that when the wind blows, it doesn't shred the tent. And so I have to build 5 igloos, right? So 5 igloos, it's just, yeah.
And okay, I mentioned this before, but you're a single mother of 7. You did all of this because I want to get into this part.
Yeah.
Because this is really cool. And before I get into this though, I wanted to make this kind of like the funny joke that I saw, because one of my favorite comedians makes a joke about Everest. And how it like, if you climb Mount Everest, you're going to go speak to businesses, right? And it's like, I'm not sure how those correlate, but I love to hear this because it's not necessarily about the climb, right? But you did this as a single mother of 7. You did this. Tell us the story. You did this after a car crash that almost ended your life, right?
Yeah.
And most of us just have to worry about the quota that we have to hit that quota, right? Not 7 kids almost dying.
You know what? 7 kids really puts everything in perspective. So I'll give you the history on the 7 kids. I did fertility treatment, and I had a bunch of embryos, which I didn't really think about at the time until I had my first child and got a bill from the fertility clinic. I said, oh, no, I've paid you plenty of money. I don't know what this bill's from. I'm good. And like, no, actually, these are your embryos on ice. Like, well, let's have a conversation about those again, because I don't really remember this part of the deal. And so I had, at that time, 12 embryos. The doctor thought I would get 2 to 3 kids. I'm like, I can do 2 to 3 kids. Like I have, I'm one of 3, that will be fine. And so you have a choice. You use the embryos, you donate the embryos, so they go to somebody, whoever. And my whole life, I didn't want to be like, are you my kid? Are you my kid? Are you my kid? Didn't feel right. And then you can destroy the embryos. but they give them to you to destroy. And I'm like, oh, I can't do that. Like that, no. My one child will die in a car wreck at 16 because of karma and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so here I am, 4 kids with embryos left, 5 kids with embryos left. And I really wanted to change my mind, right? I want to be like, okay, never mind, embryos aren't life, or, but I knew if I changed my decision, I would lose trust in myself. And I think the most important thing we have is integrity with ourselves before we can have integrity outside of ourselves. And so I have 7 wonderful blessings that challenge me every single day and make the mountains look like a cakewalk.
Yeah.
So honestly, yes.
So climbing K2 and Mount Logan are
Way easier than parenting, right? Like I only have to make one decision to make, next step forward, or does it make sense to turn around because it's not safe to make the next step forward? At home, you have all the variables for sure.
Yeah.
So I was in finance, had a successful career by all outside standards and measurements. I was not fulfilled, but not unfulfilled. I was just thinking, okay, I'll get to my life later or whatever I'm interested in later. Let me launch all these children and then do that. The car accident happened in 2018. Should have taken my life and didn't. They rebuilt it at least 50 different times and did not have one scenario where I lived. And so you come out of that experience and you're like, wow, I don't get to choose when I leave, but I sure get to choose how I show up. And if I was to die today, what would my life resume say? Like, who would Jenn Drummond be? What would people think? And that really sent me on this search of impact, right? Like, I think I was living a life of success, and now I wanted a life of significance. And that became the quest. And then doors opened, right? And I was turning 40 in 2020 to age me. And I remember thinking, I'm going to climb a mountain for my 40th birthday to launch this next decade and give it like a significant stamp. And so I was training for this mountain called Ama de Blam, which is in Nepal. It's the Paramount Pictures logo. And everybody said if there's one mountain to climb, that was it. So here I am, a homeschool teacher, because we're in COVID times, and one of my kids is complaining about his homework, and I'm like, we do hard things, you've got this. And he looks at me and he goes, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde and not a real mountain like Everest? And I'm like, Ama de Blam, not I'm a Dumb Blonde. But thank you, sweetheart. And I'm like, do your math, let's look at like Everest. And so we looked at Everest because I realized his perception was his reality. And so maybe I should do Everest, because if I do Everest, then he can say, oh, I can climb Everest. My mom did. This isn't like crazy. If this is the biggest mountain in the world and my mom can do it, well, then of course I can do it. And so then I stepped into the Everest pursuit. And along that pursuit, a coach gave me a book. And in the front of that book, there was a story of a lady that got in a Guinness World Record for skiing across the Alps. Be careful what you say out loud, because I called my coach. I'm like, I could have done that. Like, I could have gotten that Guinness World Record. Like, I can suffer. And my kids would think I'm cool. Like they learned how to read on Guinness World Record books. And my coach was like, well, we'll find you a cool one. We'll find you a cool one. And then a few months later, like, I forgot about the conversation. He said, hey, Jenn, there hasn't been a female that's climbed the 7-second summit.
For the Guinness Book of World Records?
Ever, right?
Yeah,
it's never been done by a female. So if you want to have a Guinness World Record, you should look at this. You love to travel. It's 7 mountains. It's 7 continents. You have 7 kids. You could really make an impact here. And so I'm like, okay, well, let's try it, right? Let's try this first mountain. And the journey has been this unbelievable, life-altering experience, one mountain at a time.
Yeah, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's crazy. What's the first step of climbing Mount Everest? Like, what do you have to do?
Get your mind right, to be honest with you. I would say Everest is 70% mindset and 30% physical ability. So
Which is crazy, because a lot of people die going up Mount Everest.
Yeah. Because they don't listen. Right? I think if you look at a lot of the deaths on Everest, they're not listening to their body saying, hey, I need to go back, or I need to acclimatize more, or it's not safe. I mean, you've had some tragic injury or like
Sure.
episodes that have caused things, but
Everest is unpredictable.
Yeah, but there are things where if the person would have been in tune saying, hey, my life is more significant than this summit, they'd be turning around for sure.
Yeah, that's great. So, and I guess when you talk about like mindset, so give us your perspective on the similarities between like climbing these mountains, having like everything that you've gone through, right? Overcoming the car crash, having 7 children, and maybe like, did you know you were going to have 7 children, by the way? Because you're from the Midwest, like me. There's not a lot of big families out there in the Midwest, right?
No,
So like,
I did not know I was going to have 7 children until I had 7 children. In fact, I'm the girl that could go home to like high school reunions or like, you have kids? Like, what? We didn't think you'd be the one that would have kids. And I'm like, yeah, well, I did that in abundance. So I have 7. We're good.
yeah. So I mean, everything that you've gone to up to this point, and you're leaving tonight. What are some of the things that you speak about normally, whether it's like, your life, like how somebody should pursue life, how somebody overcomes obstacles, maybe in business, like how do you overcome these trials? Because one of the things that I've always learned is like everybody's heart is different. Like I've never been a fan of like, I personally think the most unempathetic thing you could tell somebody is like if my son isn't finishing his food, like there's kids somewhere in the world starving, like that doesn't make any sense because it's still like it's hard, right? And like that's the kind of the perspective that you have. And definitely those kinds of things help put it in perspective and help kind of like you had an amazing story. I hope we get to this about helping people in the town helping the women in the town climb.
Yeah.
But let me, before we get to that story, help me find the similarities between all of that and then life and business.
I mean, I think it's all the same. Who you are in one environment is who you are in another environment, right? So the nice thing about mountaineering is you get to test where your edges are and where you like feel weak or vulnerable or unsure of yourself. And then you learn that you can push through that, right? Or you learn that, oh, this is actually a sign that I need to turn around. And that gives you permission to do that in other areas of life. Okay, I'm doing this business idea. It didn't quite turn out the way that I wanted it to. What can I take from that experience and acclimatize? What did I learn for the good, for the bad, for whatever? So now when I go back, I have all this knowledge to take and either continue or pivot or whatever direction you want to go. So I feel mountaineering is so similar to business. It's so similar to life because you're always moving, right? And it's an uphill step. And it's intentional. You don't roll up a mountain. You don't like roll into a business. You don't, I mean, it all takes purpose and thought.
Like, and you've been there before, right?
Yeah.
And because climbing, I'm sure all of the things like climbing Mount Logan right now is like, this is going to be crazy, but do you have that sense of like, it's going to be new, but it's okay? Like there's probably nothing you haven't seen yet.
Let's hope, right? Like, I mean, the universe likes to surprise us at all times, like keep us on our toes. But yeah, I mean, it's all part of it. It's like, I don't know if I've totally come to peace with needing to do Mount Logan again, but I know when I get there, it's going to make sense once I'm through it.
Yeah, you're going to, that's interesting. Yeah, because it's really hard. It would be really hard to like this is the one that, that we couldn't do last time. Yeah. But tell me the story before, this will be the last story because then I want to kind of open it up to Q&A if we have any.
Yeah.
But this is you told a story before of, maybe it was on my podcast, maybe you told me on your podcast, or maybe I heard it when I was listening to you doing some research. But you climbed a mountain, or you were at the base camp, and you realized that nobody, like a woman in that town had never climbed.
Yeah.
Tell me that story.
Okay, so you want me to look at you?
Yeah,
or
no,
everybody?
good. Yeah.
Okay. So I went to K2 in 2021, and K2 is known as like the woman eater. Actually, the first 10 women that summited K2 died, like not here anymore, and mountaineering type accidents. So like you go into that mountain with a little bit of, okay, what is it that's not working for people? I went to K2 with a Pakistani company because at the time I wanted to climb with companies that were in the country of where I was climbing to try to benefit their economy versus coming over as like the big Americans taking over. And we had a hard year. K2 2021 was a hard year. There weren't a lot of teams there because of COVID. And on our team in specific, one person lost their hand to frostbite. when I was on the mountain, again, 2 days away from the summit. The number 2 plays in my life a lot. There was an avalanche below me, and it took out one of my teammates and 2 of our guides. The 2 guides recovered, the 1 teammate did not. And so then I had a choice to continue or to turn around. And at that time, I'm like, people over peaks. This is a quest of people over peaks. So I turned around, came down the mountain, actually ended up burying a human, wrapping them in a tent, putting them under rocks, and then exiting the country as fast as I could. When I landed in LA, I was home early because we didn't summit. And I called the nanny and I said, hey, listen, I'm going to take a couple days to just sort through all this trauma and try to make sense of it. Because when you go home and your kids see you and they know everything that happened, if you're not telling them the truth or feeling authentic from that, they pick up on that. And I don't want my kids to not be able to trust what's coming out of my mouth because my energy is giving them a different read. So I'm going through what I call the grump dump. I'm complaining about everything that's happened on that expedition and then really saying, okay, that was important to complain about. This is not. And I could start sorting through it. And I always believe that failure is an opportunity. Like failure is where we learn. So what am I learning? Where's the takeaway? Why did I fail this mountain? And I really didn't come to terms with it until June of 2022. Like, okay, I'm heading back. I'm all excited, blah, 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 blah. And then I'm looking at the rosters of all the people that are signing up to climb this year. And I realize there's nobody from Pakistan that's actually signed up to climb this mountain. I'm like, that's interesting. So I called the company that I was working with and I said, why is there not any Pakistani climbers? Why are there only Pakistani workers? Like, well, no one in Pakistan has enough money to climb their own mountain. It's too expensive, it's cost prohibitive. I'm like, okay, well, I know why I failed. I'm gonna sponsor a Pakistani person to stand on top of this mountain. And so then they pulled together some people and there's actually 2 women that have been training that have never had the opportunity to climb. This is how much it costs. This is what you need to do for like gear wise and all this kind of stuff. So I told my kids we'll figure out their college education later. And I helped sponsor these Pakistani women to climb. And so when I got back to Pakistan in 2022, one, it's a different energy. Right? It's a different energy you bring to the table when you're climbing for yourself and you're climbing for others or with others. I got to the top of K2 and about 30 minutes later, both of these women got to the top of K2. And so for me, having that culture, see somebody that looks like them, see somebody that's in the village as them at the top of this mountain, what that means to be Muslim and have power as a female was the reason why I failed K2 the first time. And I share this story because I think all of us have stories of failure that we can call on. And now I challenge you to look at those and say, okay, if I'm encountering this failure again, what opportunity is presented in this moment? And take care of that.
Yeah, that's an incredible story.
It's crazy.
And yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot to say about that because I love everything about that story, just making sure that people get up there. And it kind of highlights a big principle of business that I learned kind of early, which is like take people with you. You know what I mean? Like, and be nice to somebody upon the way. I mean, eventually, like in life, you get to the point where you do the right thing just because it's the right thing. But I think getting to that point, you know, you learn that like you're never mean on the way up because you'll see everybody else on the way down.
Yeah.
Right? You'll see them all on the way down. And just like that service and like doing something greater than yourself and getting this purpose helps really put things into perspective and then like a lot of fuel there. I also love your thoughts on failure. Like, again, like I said before this interview, I was a student of Stoicism before it was cool. They actually, their philosophy on that would be like failure doesn't exist for that reason. It's like we didn't really fail though because we learned actually something about ourselves and you can't really call that a failure, right? So like it doesn't exist. But I however you frame it in your head, right? Either failure is an opportunity to move forward, like the obstacle becomes the way, or it didn't exist and this is just part of the journey that we have to, like this is the path, right? There was no other path that we could have been on. This was it, right? Well, that's incredible. What other thoughts? I mean, I know you have a lot about mindset. If you could give just one actionable tool. You've mentioned a lot about trust, and so I'm wondering if that's the answer. But if there's one tool to like elevate somebody's mindset today that they could just be like, that's what I learned from Jenn, what would it be?
Oh, that's heavy. Thank you. Um, I think the biggest takeaway is whatever calls you, right? Like whatever inspires you, that's unique to you. And so having the courage to step into what that is and bring that out to share with the world. Because I think we get inundated with so much noise exteriorly that when we learn to listen to our internal compass and then actually share that pursuit with the world, that's where the magic happens.
I love that. Thanks.
Yeah.
We'll open it up for questions. Anybody have anything? Otherwise, you can keep your
Yeah.
eye on you. Go ahead.
Jenn, I have a question. So obviously you talk about overcoming all these different challenges on each one of those summits, but I'm sure there are moments of like doubt. What was like the most difficult moment where you're like, I'm either going to do this or I'm not on the 6 summits that you've done?
Yeah, there's a lot of those moments, to be honest with you. Like, there's actually, it's kind of funny. There's this viral moment of a video clip of me on K2, and I'm like dancing, right? So everybody's looking at that from the outside, like she's dancing, she's so excited, she's having fun. The reality is that I was scared at that moment. And so I was crying and I'm like, the only way I'm going to get this fear out of me is if I like shake it out of me. Right. So like, really that's me getting rid of fear, and everybody else is looking at it like she's freaking partying on K2, which like I can now looking back on it. But at that time it was like, okay, I need to get this out of me. How do I get this feeling out of me? Cause I'm going to continue. So, yeah.
Well, and then
What made you decide you can do hard stuff? Like you've done a lot of hard stuff.
Yeah, I think it's in the hard stuff that we get to find where our limits are. And I've always been a person that likes to challenge. I've been competitive in sport. So I think it's fun learning my limit and then saying, okay, well, if I'm not pushing out, I feel like things are pushing in and making my world smaller. And so I've always been a fan of, oh, well, maybe I went too far. Now it's time to like retry again or do whatever. I never really looked at it as failure. I looked at it as, here's my limit now. Where can I take it next?
Morgan?
Yeah, after you go kick this man's ass in Canada, what's next? What's the next adventure?
Right? Everybody asks that. I'll be honest with you. I interviewed all of my kids yesterday and just said, okay, mom's leaving. This is hopefully our last mountain. I'm going to give it my best. What are you excited about? And 7 out of 7 said, we're excited that you're going to be home this summer. And like that hit a little bit harder than I expected it to. And so my goal is to just be present for these next few months and celebrate the whole experience with my kids, because they've been a part of it as much as I have, and allow that to be the award.
Yeah. I bet you never think about that. I mean, LinkedIn does a good job, or like social media does a good job of like highlighting the unsung heroes or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of different when your kids say that, right? But it's also interesting. Just to kind of play off that, because I like that question, because my kids are like the same way. They're like, so one interesting thing before we break, but like my why, it actually isn't my family. Because if you go ask my kids, they're like, if you go ask my kids, like, what does dad do? They're like, I don't know, I just want him home. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Like, what do you want me to do for work? I want you to stay here. My daughter would pay me $100,000 to never leave her side, right?
Right.
And so it's always interesting, though, that you think like, but the purpose and kind of the legacy and kind of like everything that you like hand off to them, because you mentioned something earlier about like the trust that they get, like they feel from you, and just knowing that like that's in your blood.
Yeah.
That's pretty powerful.
I mean, my daughter had friends over the other day, and when I climbed Mount Everest, I got the school involved because it was going to be the longest I'd ever been away from home. So I went to the school and I said, hey, can you keep an extra eye on my kids? I'm going to be climbing Everest. Like, well, let's turn this into an Everest campaign. So then I went in and talked about setting goals, and all the kids had little hikers in the hallway, and they said, this is what I want to be when I'm older. And I did phone calls from base camp into the classrooms. And then I came home and I went to the school and talked about it. So my kids thought it was the coolest thing ever that their mom climbed Everest, because everybody knew, right? And so the girls are over like, oh my God, your mom's the one that climbed Everest. And my daughter goes, yeah, and someday if I want to, I can too. And like though, so like they want you home, but they also want you doing the same thing. So it's just balancing, and I think it's time for me to balance with a little time at home.
Well, yeah, that was a beautiful story. Thank you so much. Jenn.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you.
We'll take a little 15-minute break, but yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks guys.